Purple Kaido is currently one of the most slept on decks in the meta. Let's talk about it. Purple is in a weird spot in set 2. The new leader, Magellan, is pretty bad. He doesn't really provide any value. But a lot of Bandai card game players tend to play the newer leaders over the older leaders, leaving them in the dust. But Kaido is definitely not a deck that you should be sleeping on right now. Let's go over some of the things that I think Kaido brings to the table that none of the other purple decks really do. Kaido has one of the most explosive leader effects in the game right now, allowing you to don -7 to trash a life card, which can just give you game out of nowhere. But the new package of purple impel down cards makes up for what this deck was lacking in set 1, consistency. You have a lot of cards that are actually relevant to the deck now that can be searched out by our first card here, Hannibal. Hannibal is a 1-cost, 2000 power, on play, look at the top 5, search for an impel down card. Much like Nami and Buggy, which are currently available for other strategies. Hannibal can search a lot of different things in this deck. Moving on to our other 1-drop in the deck, we have Bluegori. Now Bluegori is a really interesting tech card. The only reason we're running it is because it's great into the Zoro matchup to swing over Sunnykun and Nami and all their other crazy annoying 1-drops, and it's also an impel down that gets searched by Hannibal. And the 1k counter is always nice. Next up we have the 7 blocker package. We have 2 Domino and 3 Higurashi. Domino is searchable by Hannibal and Higurashi is a 3k. Pretty self-explanatory. Sadie is a impel down 2k counter. That's the only reason we're running it, so that Hannibal can search it just to give us more consistency, more counter ability. Sasaki is another 2k counter, but honestly, you should only ever counter this card. I've played it a few times, and every time it just feels terrible. Don't play this card, just counter with it. Shiryu is an insane tech card against the Zoro matchup. If you're able to go first against Zoro, play Onigashima turn 3, play this down turn 5 to get rid of a blocker and swing over something they might have attacked with, or get rid of the rest of their board with some other cards, it's just a great tempo play. Plus, it's a 5k, and it has a 1k counter, and it's impel down. Searchable. Great thing for this deck. X-Drake is another 2k counter, but he also has the on-play don -1 to trash a card from our opponent's hand, which can come up against specific matchups such as Whitebeard or Ivankov, really just to grind out whatever resources they might have left, allowing you to go for game or something like that. Now, here is the secret sleeper spicy tech in this deck. We are running 4 copies of Magellan. Magellan is a 5-cost 6k impel down, which is already pretty decent, but the main reason we're running him is for his main effects. On play, don -1, your opponent don -1, which can be really relevant against decks that want to go second, such as Whitebeard or Kinemon. It's also potentially good against things like Smoker and Ivankov, depending on how they build their deck. And the crazy part about this card is opponent's turn on KO, your opponent returns 2 Dawn to their Dawn deck. This card just has one of the craziest on KO abilities in the game right now. Now, unfortunately, we can't use it with 10-drop Kaido because it does say opponent's turn, but the pressure that this card creates is it creates a 6k body that your opponent is afraid to swing over because of how much they're going to get punished when they do it. It's not that good when your opponent's at 10 Dawn, but if you play this card on curve, you really set your opponent behind. Next up, we're running 4 copies of Queen. This is pretty standard. Queen is just a great filter card, and also I think people really underestimate the value of playing a card and then drawing cards and keeping the same amount of cards in your hand. Like, cycling in this game is actually just crazy. And also it's great filter when you draw multiple Onigashimas to just go like, Queen, draw 2, trash an Onigashima, now I just have actual cards in my hand. Very powerful card in this deck. Next up, we're running 3 copies of 6-cost King. This is probably the most generically useful removal card in the deck. Going first with Onigashima plays this card out perfectly. On 3 Dawn, we activate and play Onigashima. Going to 4, next turn we ramp to 6. Allowing us to play 6-cost King, and then we just have a 7k body that probably got rid of like one of our opponent's best cards on board at that point. Great card. I was running 4, but it tends to just kind of brick your hand up a little bit against certain matchups where they're not running a lot of 4 costs. And it's not the best into things like Smoker, which have a lot of effects that say cannot be KO'd by effects, but it's still pretty good. But it is still generically valuable against a lot of decks in the format. Particularly, it is really strong against Kinemon and Okiku, and just being able to pop that down and get rid of one of their biggest threats. Next up, we're running 3 copies of 7-cost King. King is just an absolutely great card this matchup. This deck's hardest matchups are probably Smoker and Zoro, and Smoker does tend to play like things like Kobe, which King just really easily handles, and it gets rid of some of their blockers. It's pretty nice into the Smoker matchup, but the main reason we play this card is for Zoro, which just absolutely clears their board, and it's really hard to remove because they have to Otama or Gordon and Jet Pistol it, which is just 2 cards that you're burning out of their hand for your 7-drop, which you just cleared board with. It's a great tempo swing against your worst matchup. Next up, we're running 2 Rush Kaido. This card is just absolutely cracked. It's probably the best high cost in the deck, except for maybe certain scenarios with 10-cost Kaido. But the main thing with this card is just the fact that you pop something and then it gains Rush, allowing you to just steal games that you shouldn't have. You could cut this card down to 1 if you wanted to run something like Bullet or Uta, I guess. But I think this card is just going to be generally more applicable because the ability to pop, swing immediately is really strong. And the Dawn -5, honestly, doesn't feel like that big of a downside when you can activate Onigashima and then go to gain another 2 Dawn on the following turn. It's really bad, though, if you don't have the Onigashima to set up your plays, as all purple plays are, really. Next up, we have 2 copies of 10-cost Kaido, the dream that we wish Magellan worked with, but unfortunately it doesn't. 10-cost Kaido is just so cracked against things like Zoro. It's really good against Law, just clearing the board of everything. The main thing you want to do with this card is just make sure you're able to swing everything in before dropping it down. So you want to have good sequencing when you play this card, but this card is just really good. Next up, we're running 4 copies of Hell's Judgment. This is just the best, most cracked counter in the game right now. It's an Impel down, which is really big for Hannibal and just the whole package that we're running. But let me just read this card to you. It's a 2-cost counter event, Dawn -1. Give up to 2 of your opponent's leaders or characters -3,000 during their turn. It's crazy. This basically can shut off 2 swings. Sometimes you can even just use it on a meaningless attack like a 5k swing, and then shut off 3 swings by going like +1 and then counter with Hell's Judgment to shut off the rest of their attackers. It's absolutely cracked. And even the trigger I found can be kind of relevant sometimes. It says if your opponent has 6 or more Dawn, they return a Dawn to their Dawn deck. They get to choose which Dawn they return, so it's not that cracked, but sometimes it can really set your opponent behind if they need to play something on curve. Great card. This card is just easily the best counter in the game right now, hands down. And then next up, we're running 4 Onigashima, the stage card that lets us ramp, and just the card you want to see every game. This deck does still just mulligan for Onigashima. There's no way around it, really. Your deck is just at a huge disadvantage if you have to Dawn -1 every turn. Magellan, particularly, is not that great. If you're Dawn -1 and your opponent to Dawn -1 your opponent, not that strong of a play. But if you can maintain your Dawn pressure by activating Onigashima, keeping the same amount of Dawn, and your opponent is now down a Dawn, that is a really powerful play. Overall, this deck is cracked. I think its worst matchups are probably Zoro and Smoker. Kinemon, it has a fairly advantageous matchup into as long as it just doesn't brick, but it is purple and it is One Piece, so the chances of that are pretty likely. Overall, Kaido just feels really strong this meta, and I'm pretty pleased with this list. I think once I'm done grinding my Whitebeard deck, this is definitely the deck I'm going to be playing a lot at locals and maybe even at some of the treasure cups if I'm feeling particularly confident in it. But I think this deck is pretty good. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Include any tech cards that you might have or think I should try. Thanks for watching all my One Piece videos. They've been doing a lot better than some of the other videos I've made in the past, and I'm really enjoying making One Piece content. I'll catch you guys next time.